So let's talk about the difference between working with actors and working with performers,
Yes.
particularly when you've done so much variety and the Oscars. You know, I mean, the Oscars is a big variety show. It really is. You're dealing with people who are actors who are not necessarily used to going out there and being funny, and they're speaking your words largely. How do you deal with that?
And you cross your fingers and you pray. One of the reasons why people love the Tony Award show is because all of those people are stage actors, and they are used to being on stage every night. And forget that all those numbers they're seeing are being done 8 times a week, and so everybody's at the top of their game. On the Oscar show, you're dealing with movie stars. Movie stars generally work on a set like this with cameras and lights, and they can do it again if they get it wrong. And they're not used to having to deal in the moment with a live audience. So when they come out and they don't have a character to play, they're frozen. They don't know what to do. They have no them character that they've worked on. When you have a performer who's used to coming out on stage and being Billy Crystal or being Lily Tomlin or being Whoopi Goldberg, they know who they are when they're on stage. I used to say Shirley MacLaine knows who she is. She knows who she was. She's doubly blessed. But Johnny Depp doesn't know who he is when he comes out on stage. There is no Johnny Depp character. If you say, okay, this is Jack Sparrow, okay, then he knows what to do. So you try and kind of just coach them or give them as little to do as possible that they can mess up. The other way to go is to try and give them something that plays into one of their characters. That was a huge error I committed on Keanu Reeves. On the Oscars, we tried to get him to present an award as either Bill or Ted, whichever one he was from those movies, you know, stoner dude. And it was just catastrophic because you know, it was out of context. It wasn't anything that stoner dude would do. And I felt, and in rehearsal I said, don't do it that way. Oh, I want to do it that way. I want to try, you know. He was committed to it, so I felt bad for him. But that's the problem, is giving Charlize Theron somebody that she can be when she's out there presenting an award, because you know, Charlize Theron is a concoction. You know, I mean, she's a South African girl who's now American, who's whatever, and there is no person for her to be when she comes out there. So you wind up concentrating on the category.
Do you think that might have had something to do with the Anne Hathaway, James Franco situation in terms of America not really having something to clue into?
Yeah, I do. But I think that Anne knew what she was doing. I think that she had a certain kind of hostess persona that she was genuinely excited, and she, you know, looked glamorous and all of that. And James, he didn't really bring it. He blames the writing, and he hired the writers, and everything had to be tossed and salvaged at the last minute. But he also, he just didn't bring the energy. He wasn't present, and he says, well, I did the best I could with what I was given, and that's not the point. The point is, if you're going to take the gig, take the gig. Do the gig. You're supposed to be there and get invested in it. And when the press asked me initially, I said, well, he had a lot of balls in the air and he wasn't focused. And he wasn't. I mean, this is a guy who sits there at in rehearsals tweeting and twatting and texting. And I mean, I like him personally. He's a very lovable guy. But I felt that he also was not prepared to work with Anne and made her look robotic and hyper, because he was just so in his shell.
How does it affect you as a writer when, on a personal level, when a performer or an actor who turns around and says it was the writer's fault?
Well, you want to get out your Gatling gun and just pepper his brain. Yeah, but after a while you realize that that's what they do. You know, there's a great old joke which I will recast with Donald Trump. But the joke is about a guy who's a very wealthy industrialist, and he's always wanted to play Hamlet. and he's so wealthy that he rents a theater and he hires a Royal Shakespeare Company, and he rehearses, and it's a big opening night, and he comes out as Hamlet, and he stinks. He's absolutely awful. And the audience kind of gets restless, and then they get kind of restive, and then they get downright hostile, and now they're throwing chocolates at him. And he's ducking stuff, and he comes storming down stage center and says, "Well, don't blame me, I didn't write this shit." Yeah, that's the attitude you have to have, is that it's the most obvious way to go. It's the most, I love when they say, "I told him that wouldn't work." You know, it's like, if I thought it wasn't going to work, I would have given you a saver. You know, and you know what the saver is. The saver is when something doesn't work, you have something that will follow it up. That is like, it's a variation on that. And I mean, Johnny Carson was famous for having a million savers, but after a while, you say it was either him or me. So,
and there is a process to the writing, and what happens if you send somebody a draft of material that you're thinking, okay, this is a great place to go. Here's a bunch of ideas, and they send it back and they have just marked it all up, and how do you deal with their notes?
Well, it depends on the situation. If you're working on a sitcom and you get that kind of stuff from the actors, you just say, no, you'll do it the way we wrote it. Unless they're very powerful. If they're the star of the show and the show is built around them, it all depends on how the relationship has evolved. When you're doing it on the Oscar show, somebody sends you back, you basically want to accommodate them. You want them to be comfortable. And they know their comfort level better than you do. And it's stupid to try and fight. You're just going to get them angry, and it's better to make it as comfortable as you possibly can. What you want is a situation where they're not just doing it because they're insecure. They're doing it because they have a genuine understanding of what they can do. On the last Oscar show, Sandra Bullock was presenting Best Actor, and I wanted it to be funny and offhand. And she can be funny and offhand, and she knows that, and I know that. So we had a good time playing around with the material. It wasn't painful at all. But sometimes with other people, it'll be just a pain in the ass, because it's just coming from their insecurity. It's not coming from any sort of inner understanding of themselves.
And how much time do you get to write an Oscar show, an Academy Awards?
Well, you start in the fall when the producer comes in, and hopefully the host will come in, and you can actually sit down and have meetings about things. And then you can write the stuff that doesn't require the nominations. But mostly, almost everything gets written after the nominations come out. So you have a fast month to do the actual writing of the thing, because you don't want to spend time on something that is not going to be relevant on the night. One year, Jim Carrey did a movie where he played Andy Kaufman called Man on the Moon, and Billy was hosting that year, and we were so convinced that he was going to get a nomination. We had all this stuff worked out, and we were going to have Tony Clifton show up, and the Andy Kaufman character, and all this kind of stuff. And then the Academy ignored the movie completely. And so all that stuff went out the window, and we just kind of sat there for a day, eating bagels and lox, saying, "We're fools! We're fools! We should have known better." But the good stuff can happen once the nominations are announced, because then you know what you're focusing on.
And sometimes world events really affect what happens.
Yeah,
with
like
shows
invading
like
Iraq.
Well, 9/11 itself had an effect on that show.
Not on the Oscars, on the Emmys.
On the Emmys, yeah.
It had a big effect on the Emmys because the Emmys are right around 9/11, and this year they're on 9/18. So they really got caught, but they did it brilliantly. That was Ellen hosting it that year, and they held off for a few weeks, I guess, and then they came back with she was quite wonderful. She was quite wonderful. It affected the Oscar show, but the Oscar show was 6 months later, but we wound up doing a tribute to New York, which was a way to get Woody Allen on the show for the first time ever, and probably the last time. And that was Laura Ziskin's idea. It was her first year producing the show, and she came up with. We knew we had to do something with 9/11, and she said, let's translate it into a celebration of New York. And who better to do it than Woody Allen? And of course, Woody introduced it, and then the piece was done by Scorsese. So we had the two biggest New York filmmakers in the room, which was pretty great. And that was all Laura.
Which speaks to the incredible global impact that show has in terms of the world's eyes were on New York. Talk to me a little about the demographics of that show and how it's evolved and over time. I mean, has your material with the show had to evolve with a changing audience?
Well, there are a couple of things. Traditionally, the Oscars are known as the Super Bowl of women. Now, if you're going to sell tampons, buy time on the Oscars, because you have the single largest audience of women that will be watching any single show in the year. If you're going to sell Chevy trucks, buy on the Super Bowl, because you'll have the single largest audience of men. So advertisers tend to skew the show towards women because it's demographically women. What's happened is there is a proliferation of award shows, so leading up to the Oscars. And it's kind of like, I wonder what the royal wedding would have been like if they had had every single shower and engagement party televised up until the royal wedding. Would people be sick of her already by the time the wedding came? That's what the Oscars go through every year. Are you really, can you stand watching Julia Roberts do one more acceptance speech for Erin Brockovich? It's like that. So that has changed the viewership. The viewership has declined because they're a little tired of watching all those award shows, and also it's a 500 channel universe, and also a lot of those shows that a younger audience that would be interested might have already tuned out because they've got their own shows that celebrate their favorites, like MTV and the Video Awards, the Music Awards, Teen Choice, Kids' Choice, all that kind of stuff. They know Robert Pattinson is not going to win Best Actor for Twilight on the Academy Awards. And the question is, do they really care if Robert De Niro wins? You know, Robert De Niro is old enough to be their grandfather. Can they work up any real interest in this? And the songs that are nominated are pretty much middle of the road, unless you get an aberration like It's Hard Out There for a Pimp, which I'm sure brought Pimp viewership way up that year. I mean, I could tell. It was just every crack house in town was tuned in to the show that year.
Well, and you've been with the show for a long time, but one of the interesting things that we were not warned about at Y2K was that you became head writer.
Well, I became head writer some years. Some years there is no head writer, some years there is a head writer. It really varies depending on who the producer is and who the host is.
And how is the writing divvied up? I mean, if there's a host who has, like an Ellen, a group of people around her, how does that writing get divvied up? Do they just write for her? Do you write for presenter? Is there a separation?
Sometimes. There's always a separation, and I am sometimes on one side or the other of it. The host will come in with his own writers most of the time, but sometimes not. This year, there were no writers for the host, although we eventually wound up getting writers towards the end for James Franco, and then Anne Hathaway brought in somebody so she would be represented at the table. Some years I've been on the host team, some years I've been on the show team, some years I've been liaison between the host and the show. It varies from year to year. It's pretty amazing, depending on who's doing it.
Given the availability of the running gags that we've spoken about, is there ever a point where you feel, okay, this script is locked?
Never. It's never locked because it's live. and it's going out around the world, and so things happen, and you want to be able to capitalize on that. So the script, I mean, there's a script, it's in the teleprompter, but it's never locked, because what will give it the fuel is the acceptance speeches. People will come up and do whatever they're going to do, and that will generally be what brings you in the new material, reacting to those acceptance speeches.
How involved is the Academy in all of the decisions of production that go into the order of the show, the order of the hosts, which hosts go where? Do you have input in that?
The Academy is always involved, but generally you deal with the president of the Academy. He's the one who, you just go to him for the shorthand decision. He will consult with the executive director, and depending on what it is, if there's a particular branch involved, he'll consult with them. But he's the go-to guy for pretty much everything, and the producers deal with him. I have. What was the second part of that question? I'm trying to.
How much input do you have?
I have as much input as the producers want. I mean, sometimes they just want to deal with it all themselves. They just want to consult. Sometimes they reach out because I've been there before and they haven't. Someone like Gil Cates, who's produced 14 or 17 of the 22 shows that I've done, knows so well what he's doing that he brings me in as necessary. It changes every year. The thing about that show is it changes every year backstage, but it always looks like the same show because the Academy forces it into a certain format. As long as they give every single award on the show, it's going to look like what it's going to look like. It's going to have that structure of people trying to get through all these awards, and very few of the awards being given to people the audience recognizes, and a lot of stuff that's entertaining the audience in between.
Are you ever called on to provide acceptance speeches for people?
I have been, yes. I've been called to consult, because you never know. I mean, a lot of people are afraid to ask anybody to help because they think that'll jinx it. But I have been called by a few people to say, I need a line here, a joke there. What would you say about such and such? And I need something really nice. I think they tend to call, serious writers who they think will write something beautiful and flowery for them. But you can never get anybody to admit that, because these are all supposed to be from the heart. Obviously, they will admit that someone gave them a joke, but they're not going to say someone gave them this brilliant turn of phrase that is quoted for the rest of the century.
And if someone were to admit that you gave them a joke, who might that be?
Oh, Bette Midler. I mean, of acceptors, I'd have to think. I would really have to think. Because I don't get it too much because people are. It's not so much on the Oscars as it is on other things where they.
Generally speaking, then, how many writers would be involved in a typical year, or is that vary so much because of hosts?
It varies because of hosts. I mean, the host can have 10 writers of their own. There are 3 or 4 people who actually write the show, and then the host will have a lot of people who will throw material at him, her. And sometimes it crosses. When Whoopi was doing it, and I would be the head writer, and there would be a couple of people who were writing on the show, and then I'd bring in people specifically to write Whoopi material. So there'd be 4 or 5 of them, and 3 or 4 of the others. So it's generally about 10 people.
Was there ever a moment that went over much bigger than you ever expected?
That's a great question, because I'm trying to think of much bigger. There were things that didn't work, obviously, that you remember those. The ones that went over bigger than expected, a little line like Kathy Bates came out and said, I can't remember the line now, but it was off of It's a Wonderful Life. So every time something dies, an agent gets his wings. What's the line from It's a Wonderful Life?
Every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings.
A bell rings, an angel gets his wings. Something like every time. I don't know, something like that. And it got a huge laugh. And I thought, Vervace.
Well, certainly
What's
not
this coming from?
Certainly not the Oscars, but the most understated line I can remember that I know you had a hand in was Paul Rubens.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about that moment.
Well, Paul Rubens, Pee Wee Herman, had been arrested in a porno house in Sarasota, Florida, for pleasuring himself, which is what people do in porno houses. And it gave rise to a joke saying, who are Abraham Lincoln and Abraham Lipschitz, two famous Americans. Oh, what? No, wait, was it? Well, now what's that joke? Name two Americans who got shot in theaters, Abraham Lincoln and the guy who sat in front of Pee Wee. That was the joke. So anyway, so he got busted that year, and the whole Pee Wee Herman thing exploded. And about a year later, it was the MTV Music Awards, and he came out and opened the show. And he called me up and said, I need one line to come out there because it's my first appearance in a year as Pee Wee. And we spent a whole day going through a litany of one-line things he could say. And it came down to one little fart and they call you stinky. And that was what we wanted to do. And then MTV said, you can't say fart because this is going to get syndicated and they'll have to bleep it. We can do it on our show, but when we syndicate it, we can. So our alternate was, heard any good jokes lately? Because there were so many Pee Wee Herman jokes, including the one I quoted. And it was a huge ovation. And I think probably it was a better choice because it was Pee Wee saying, yeah, I've heard them too, I get it. I've been the object of all of this, but I'm back. And so it worked perfectly the way it was. So see, because we ran afoul of a censor, we came up with something better.
You've said in interviews that you try to front load good material. What does that mean and why do you do it?
On award shows, you try to front load material because for everybody who wins an award, there are 4 people who lose. And so as the evening wears on, the audience fills up with losers. And they're not really interested in your comedy material. They are just sitting there, they're bitter, and they're plotting revenge. And so it gets to be very quiet out there as the evening wears on. So you want to do your best stuff in the front when they're in a good mood. They're still excited and happy to be there. Because it's a unique audience. You know, you don't find that with a regular audience. A regular audience doesn't have anything resting on what's going on stage. They just want to have a good time. This audience, you are just a speed bump on their way to whatever's going to happen to their careers after this evening. So best to get all the good stuff out of the way early.
In the interest of getting it all out early, has there ever been something that was a notable disaster, in your opinion?
A notable disaster? I don't know if it was a disaster. I mean, you know, Letterman did things from his show that he probably shouldn't have done on the Oscars. I don't know if it was a disaster, but it was kind of like, why is there a spinning dog? You know, why is that going on? But I don't know about a disaster. I mean, some things didn't work out the way we thought. Gil Cates, who produced many of these shows, loves themes, and one year the theme was the Year of the Woman. I don't know where this came from. And a joke that Billy had was, it was also the year of Basic Instinct. And Billy's joke was, it's ironic that this is the Year of the Woman. We're celebrating women's parts because the biggest parts seen on a woman all year were Sharon Stone's. And it got an ooh, because it had followed this gorgeous clip package of women in the movies through the years. It was really moving. It was beautifully put together. And the audience was in tears when it was over. And it was a tribute to women, but partially it was all those emotional scenes you remember women having in the movies. And so to come out and do a cheap twat joke after that was just the wrong thing. And had we seen the clip, we wouldn't have done it. But in one of those unfortunate instances where the Billy wasn't there, or I wasn't there, the clip wasn't ready, whatever, we never got to see the clip. Or the clip was kept a big secret, and nobody could see it because they didn't want to, reveal what they were doing. In any event, we suffered for it.
How do you stay as informed about what goes on in the world and in everybody's lives the way we know you to be informed? It seems that you have a lot of information at your fingertips, a file cabinet full of material and little index cards like Joan Rivers has kept every joke ever written.
Well, everybody does. I mean, when you find something funny, you make a note of it somewhere. But I just kind of keep up. I think that's the journalism training. I spent the first 7 years on a newspaper, and you had to be. I was in the center of the universe. When you're on the Chicago Tribune, the Miami Herald, those papers, I was in the center of the universe. Everything was being filtered through me. I had a job to do. It was to stay on top of what was going on. And it's become even easier now because we're so media accessible. So if now I have to physically shut it out because it keeps screaming at you. I mean, I remember when I was on the newspapers, we didn't have what they called a news cycle. That was something that came up in the last 10 years, a news cycle. That every 24 hours, the cable news services refresh themselves, and a story comes and goes. And it builds, it ebbs, it flows. The Wiener story. I love that.
I could just see you having a field day, as everybody did.
It's a gift when somebody named Wiener shows his wiener. It's just a gift. I mean, but it couldn't be somebody named Smith.
And how does the Emmys differ in approach from the Oscars, or does it?
The Emmys differs from the Oscars in that they tend to give the awards to the same people every year. So year after year, you're sitting there watching Edie Falco run up the aisle every year. And because there's a sameness to it, they tend to celebrate whatever is new that year and go crazy. Like last year, they went crazy with Glee because it was suddenly so hot. Because the awards are generally going to be for the same old, same old. The Oscars are fresh every year with movies. It's a new crop. I mean, to come out there this year and do a joke about Precious. I mean, Precious was tough enough to do a joke about the year before when it was there. But there's a whole new class that comes in every year that is fodder. And so as a result, you get a bunch of new stuff you can do. With the Emmys, you're looking at the Emmys and you're saying, oh my God, more Modern Family. I'm going to have to do more Law and Order. How many things can we say about Mariska Hargitay losing? I mean, it was a huge joke. I wrote the daytime Emmys for years. It was a huge joke that Susan Lucci loses again. I mean, that's because she was nominated 17 times for the same performance. Angela Lansbury was nominated 7 times for the same performance and never won. So it's like, that's the challenge with the Emmys, is making that stuff new, stuff that anybody wants to watch.
You were involved in creating the Screen Actors Guild Awards.
It was, yeah.
What are the challenges with a new award show? As that was 1995. A few years ago, since then the proliferation of award shows has almost become epic. Mm-hmm. What was it like setting that up?
That was, well, the funny thing about the Screen Actors Guild Awards is that you would think it would be a home run because it's only acting awards. And so we put this thing together and did it on NBC, and it didn't get much of a rating. And NBC had it there thinking it would be like the Golden Globes, which is almost all acting awards, that people would want to see another show that was all full of actors getting things. But they didn't. And the Screen Actors Guild, of which I'm a member, took the show very seriously and actors were talking seriously about acting, and it was put together by a committee. I mean, when you do the Oscars, you deal with the president of the Academy and maybe the executive director. But the Screen Actors Guild, there's a committee of like 8 actors who are in charge of the thing. And you can never get them all in one room because this one's at an audition and that one is shooting and this one, and mostly they're actors who don't work a lot. Those are the ones who you wind up with, and they're busy making decisions. And all of a sudden they're producers. And it's a pain in the ass. And so I didn't do it after the first year. And after 2 years on NBC, they went to cable, and they remained on cable. And so I don't think that they've created a very strong identity. Now it's kind of like a run-up to the Oscars. It's just another one of those shows. They're difficult to get off the ground. And if you don't have something institutional behind it, it seems to me the public thinks it's bogus. In many cases, it is bogus. And while SAG is for real, it's actors patting actors on the back, and in a very kind of almost solemn situation, as opposed to the Golden Globes, where no one really gives a rat's ass. And they're all having fun and they're all drunk.
There are things that are solemn and serious that you're involved with. In fact, you donate a lot of time and write for things like comic relief. You've done AIDS benefits, benefits for children in need. You even hosted an LGBT diversity event here at the Television Academy.
Yeah.
Why do you lend your name and talents to these efforts? What's the value and importance there to you?
Well, I suppose I could, do the standard answer of giving back, but it just, I guess because I was raised Jewish, and there's a concept in Judaism called tzedakah, which means charity, and it's something that you do. We take care of ourselves. When you're raised Jewish, you learn that everybody hates you, and no one's going to help you, and you've got to do it yourself. And that's why people don't get Israel. That's the Israeli philosophy is, we know everybody hates us, we know nobody's going to help us, we have to take care of ourselves. That's a very old Jewish way of thinking. And when you're raised in that, you become philanthropic in spite of yourself, because you know that no one else is going to do it for you, and it's up to you, and you're living in that tradition. And so when the AIDS crisis hit, and nobody wanted to do anything about it, and it was up to the gay community to take the reins and do something about it. Since I'm gay, I stepped up, and I was losing so many people. I decided that something had to be done. What could I do? Well, I'm in show business, and we put on a show, and we raised money that way. So we started doing that, and then I discovered as I was doing that there's a kind of quid pro quo. And I would go to you and I would say, if you do your benefit, my benefit, I'll do your benefit. And that was how I became associated with all the major diseases.
And comic relief?
Yeah, well, comic relief was a separate thing. Comic relief was a bunch of show business people who were responding to Ronald Reagan and to the dismantling of the welfare system and the cuts in education and the cuts that created a nation of homeless. That was all Reagan's fault, and we have him to thank for that. And that was comedians who tend to be from the left and on the edge of society to begin with, noticing that the world had changed and that something had to be done, and nobody else was going to take the cudgels. And it kind of cuts across the board because it was a uniquely American problem at the time. You'll notice that I think we did 12 comic reliefs, and it's hard to get one together anymore because there are so many other issues now. It's all become so fractionalized. Now,
you have revealed here for the very first time that you're gay.
Yes, I know. And shopping.
Has the portrayal of gays in media changed since you began your career? And have you ever felt any sort of backlash or discrimination for being openly gay?
Well, I've been very fortunate because I'm in a business where you can be flamboyant, you can be eccentric, you can be individualistic, and it's considered an asset. So I always sort of, I guess, kept them guessing, and then I would never hide. I would reveal who I was, and I'd read something that Merle Miller wrote. And Merle Miller was a historian who wrote some exceptional stuff, and he was gay. And he said, a faggot is a homosexual gentleman who has just left the room. And I determined that I was going to be that person, that I was not going to let you call me a faggot behind my back. I was going to let you know that when you called somebody a faggot, that you were calling me a faggot. I was, in fact, a faggot. And that I wasn't happy about that. And it was amazing to me always how people reacted, because they think, and they still think to this day, that faggot means weak. I mean, that was Eminem's defense for why he used the word faggot. And kids who use fag still say, oh, I didn't know I was saying anything bad. I'm talking about somebody who's weak. When I say it's so gay, I mean, it's so weak you could push it over. And when you confront them on it and tell them, guess what? I'm not weak. I'm strong. I can take you. They suddenly have a respect for you because they didn't realize that you cared. Once they realize that you have no shame, that in fact you have pride, and you're willing to identify yourself as gay, they back off because you've taken the lead out of the pencil. There's nothing they can do about it. And that is a page that we've taken from the civil rights movement. You know, when you now know in no uncertain terms that you just can't call anybody a nigger, because it's been hammered into you, you have to say the N-word, because they fight back. Guess what? They fight back, and we fight back. And so I determined very early on that I was going to have my little one-man campaign of fighting back, and I got a lot of respect because of it. Now, I'm sure that there are jobs that I didn't get because I was openly gay, and they didn't want to work with me. I'm sure that those are people who I didn't want to work with to begin with. And if I missed anything, I don't really think I missed anything, because it wouldn't have been a good situation. I was offered the original Saturday Night Live. I went and I met with them. It was a very locker room. They hated women. They hated gays. They weren't thrilled about black people. They had Garrett Morris and nobody else. The women had to fight for every single thing that went on that show. It was not a pleasant situation. And Lorne, who was a very decent guy, Lorne Michaels, was kind of unaware of that because he lives in his own world. But I would not have been comfortable there. And I'm not sorry that I turned away from it, because I think it would have been really bad. I think I would have wound up on all the drugs that they wound up on.
And you had your own.
Exactly right. I mean, why should I deny that the guy I had out here, I'd made the connection? Why find somebody in New York? Jesus.
Well, and you certainly haven't missed on anything. You've been part of some of television's greatest moments.
I have.
Johnny Carson's farewell.
Yes.
That Bette Midler moment is something people hold up as one of the greatest things in television.
It was a great moment. And we sat down, and she was going to be his next to last guest, or his last guest after Robin Williams. He was on the show that night also. And we decided to put together a traditional Bette Midler, Johnny Carson spot, where she sang and then did some special material that we cooked up, and then she would sing something. She would sing something hot, and then she would wind up singing something sweet. It was, we sat there, me and Mark Shaman, who then went on to write Hairspray and Catch Me If You Can, and South Park. We sat there and came up with that spot, and it was quite something. But then, she's quite something. I can't think of many people who could have pulled that off. She's pretty, extraordinary.
Now, in the small time we have left, yes. I do have a little wrap-up I want to get to, but I can't let time pass without talking about the Hollywood Squares, which is largely responsible for a good portion of Americans knowing who you are by face.
I know. I became a public person. Well, when you're on television, every night, 5 nights a week, they know who you are.
How did you first get involved in working on that?
This was the 3rd iteration of Hollywood Squares. I had worked on the first when Paul Lynde was on it, and he'd become the center square, and he was doing Donnie and Marie. And I was writing for him on Donnie and Marie, and they were shooting squares at night. and he would say to me, "Come with me to Squares, I haven't got shit." And we'd get in the car and we would write jokes. And so I knew the kind of the way it went. And then there was a second iteration with Joan Rivers and Jim J. Bullock and Wayland Flowers and Madam, and I wrote for them, but it was not formal. It was just, I gave them stuff off camera. I mean, I wasn't there even. And then when the third iteration came around, it was being produced by Pat Lee and John Moffat, who did the comic relief shows and who I'd known for many years. And they called me up and they said, it's going to be a comedy show. We really want it to be funny, and we want to have a funny bunch of writers who can supply people with jokes. Would you be the head writer? And I said, yeah, sure. It was crazy money. And we only shot 36 days a year because we shot 5 shows in a day. And that was all on weekends. And I said, it sounds great. So I said yes. They then shopped around for a host. They wanted a big Center Square apartment person. And they got Whoopi. And Whoopi said, oh, I'd written for Whoopi for ages. They said, he should host. And they said, she's crazy. But they didn't want to piss her off that early in the relationship. So they tested me to host. And I went in there with all these guys, with big teeth and this is for the win, Susan. And it was afterwards they said, well, you're not exactly what we're looking for as a host, but we'd like to put you in a square. And I always thought they put me in the square next to Whoopi because they were afraid of her. And they thought maybe he'll tame her. Or maybe the two of them up there together will have a good time, whatever. And so there I was, and it happened. It just worked. We had a nice chemistry, and it was the group that they put together with Caroline Ray and Brad Garrett and Gilbert Gottfried. It was a fun group. And I wasn't on all of them, but I was on most of them. And Tom Bergeron, who was somebody who Whoopi and I had both worked with on a Fox morning show that he was hosting, wound up coming in and being the host. And we all became very friendly and are friendly to this day. But it was amazing because I'd been around, at the time, I'd been around for 20 years. And suddenly I was on camera. I wasn't behind the scenes. I was suddenly the person who was giving autographs at the airport, and because I was on television every night. My mother kept saying, "This is incredible." She says, "You're on television every night." I said, "Yeah, but so was Charles Manson." I mean, it's like Casey Anthony is on television every night. I mean, it's like, and that's what it is. You're on TV every night. They don't exactly know why. You're just, oh my God, you're on TV. And so it became quite an education. And I'd been around long enough not to be bowled over by it. Because when it first happens to you, I watched it happen to Barry Manilow when suddenly he was a teen idol out of nowhere. I mean, it can really knock you for a loop. No one is prepared for that kind of scrutiny and bombardment.
So, Get Bruce, a documentary about your life.
Yes, well, that was a few years after that. What happened was Andy Keene, who was a friend of mine who ran a big house that did trailers, not double-wide trailers, but movie trailers. Was a friend of mine, and he came to me one day and he said, "There should be a documentary of your life." And Fellini had just died, and I said, "He's the only guy who could really do it." And he said, "No, I want to do it." And so I said, "Look, if you can get all these people who I've worked with to sign off on their deconstruction, then you got it." And he did. He actually went around and got all these people to do interviews. I mean, the main interviews are Bet, Robin, Whoopi, and Billy, and he shot backstage. The Oscars wouldn't let him, of course, because nobody's allowed to shoot backstage there. But Elizabeth Taylor allowed him. Elizabeth had sold her birthday. We had a birthday party for her 65th birthday, and it was the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation. And all the money went to the foundation, and she let them come and shoot the making of that show. So a lot of people, including Elizabeth, were on that show, were in the movie because of that. And it was released. Miramax saw it and they liked it and they released it. And it was released during right as the second season of Hollywood Squares started, so everything was happening at once. I was on TV every night. I had this movie about me that suddenly was in theaters. I was in high cotton.
Well, if they were to do it now, it would be a reality show. Now, you've done reality. You did Celebrity Fit Club.
I know. The sequels had Bruce, which is a much larger cast. I did Celebrity Fit Club, yes. It probably would be reality. And in fact, I'm trying to get a reality show going myself, because why not? Everybody, I could be Snooki.
I don't know about the hair bump.
You really? I'm the constipation. Hello.
Well, what is your opinion of reality television? You're a writer.
I can't watch it because I did Celebrity Fit Club, and I know that it's all unreal. Lily Tomlin says that you shouldn't be allowed to do reality television unless you can prove you're in touch with reality. Because so little of it is. It's all staged. None of it's real. The celebrity end of it is particularly galling because they want you to behave like a Farkle. They treat you like you have no idea what's going on. They would like you to hurt yourself. They would like you. They'd like you to die on camera if they possibly could. They don't care. They're just about doing a show, and it's just nothing is real. How can anything be real when there are 16 cameras roaming around? Everything is staged. All that stuff.
There are people who do it to reignite a career or to be recognized.
I did it because they were paying me to lose weight. I said, that's the Jewish diet. Pay me and I'll lose weight. I'd never heard of that before. Had my mother paid me, I might have lost weight earlier.
Well, and you don't need television to be recognizable. You have quite a distinctive look yourself.
Exactly, I know.
I know you've had red glasses. You sold yours to Sally Jesse.
The thing about Celebrity Fit Club was I determined I was going to be real and honest and not hide anything. And so suddenly, from just being a guy who does jokes, I was a guy with a physical problem and a soul, and there was no bullshit about it. They really wanted me to get hurt. They were looking for me to get hurt, and they kept throwing things at me to make me that I wouldn't do. And they never filmed any of that. They never filmed any of me balking, but there was plenty of balkage. And they just. I lost 21 pounds, but my team captain was Chastity Bono, and she lost a lot more than that.
You've been a writer. You are a writer. Will always be a writer. On-camera talent in one form or another, whether scripted, Squares, Mahogany, Fit Club. You've done Hairspray.
Yes.
Do you have a preference for writing versus acting? And
I actually love them both. You get a different rush when you perform. You get a real physical adrenaline rush, and it's quite fabulous. You don't get that when you're writing. You can get into what I call the alpha state, where you're writing something which is so involving that you forget about everything else. But it's a very private thing, and watching it be performed it can be a very harrowing experience. When you're performing itself, even if it's not going well, you're in the moment and doing all of that. So there are two different kinds of gratification, and I like having them both. But I suppose if I had to make a choice, I'd rather be performing because it's more immediate. It's lonely being a writer, even when you're in a room full of writers. It's still, at some point you actually have to sit down and come up with the stuff yourself.
I do have to ask, what's the inspiration behind your signature look, the T-shirts?
Oh, well, when you have tits like these, you must show them off, I've learned. I lived I was in rebellion. I'm still in rebellion. When you're a fat kid, nothing fits. Everything is uncomfortable. My mother always dressed me up. I was never happy in what I was wearing. And so I determined the moment I got away from the house, I was going to dress the way I liked in the most comfortable way possible. And so I started wearing T-shirts as a joke because I was in the joke business and I've had jokes on them. And it became a trademark. And I was so happy because I didn't have to ever think about what tie goes with what shirt or ever having the feeling that I'm going to die of strangulation because the collar is just so tight. I haven't had that feeling in many years.
I know you get fan mail. I know you do.
Yes.
What kind of mail do you get?
Prison letters. Lots of prisoners, they love me. I mostly get letters from people who say, "You're so funny, how do I become a comedy writer, or how do I become a comedian?" And a lot of times I get very sweet letters that say, "Well, you probably don't get a lot of fan mail because you're behind the scenes a lot, but I want you to know you're appreciated." It's really very sweet. I mean, I've only had one stalker, and he was kind of nice.
How much did you pay him?
And not enough, obviously, because he moved on. He's stalking Michael Moore.
Is there anybody...
He has a type, I think.
Oh. And do you have a type? Is there somebody that you haven't worked with that you would really like to work with?
There probably is, and I can't think of who it would be.
Is there somebody...
Isn't that, I mean, I don't know. I would have to... I've never worked with Ricky Gervais, and he's funny. Although I think he miscalculated on the Golden Globes, but... and I'm friendly with Eddie Izzard, and I'd love to work with him because I think he's a genius. And there probably are others, but off the top of my head, I'm not sure.
Is there
Lisa Lampanelli is a riot, and I mean, it'd be fun working with her because you can get away with anything.
Is there somebody who will not work with you?
I'm sure there is.
That you know of?
I can't think of who. Honestly can't think of who I would be probably misspeaking because it may be what I think, but it may not in fact be reality. I may just think this one's got it in for me or something like that. But although I can't think of anybody right now, I mean I think in certain situations, people have to make choices. And there's just so much money in a budget, and they'll say, "Well, I really want this one, so I'm going to have to forego that one." But I don't think there's anybody who's gunning for me. But what do I know?
In the land of writing jokes, how do you come to a moment with a joke where you know it's there, or is it like a script for the Oscars where it's always alive? Do you ever lock the joke and say, "That's it. This is it. We have a gem"?
Well, you lock a joke when you know it works. In your mind, you've locked it. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be in the script, but pretty much it's the way it is. It's not going to change. I mean, unless somebody comes along and says, "You know, what would be funnier is if thus and such happened," but. If you're asking once it's in the script, is it guaranteed it will stay forever? No. I mean, things are fluid. Things can change. It could be the wrong moment all of a sudden to do that kind of a joke, whatever it happens to be. So things change. Now, it's different when you're writing for like a sitcom or a movie or something like that, and they're going to commit it to film. So once you have the thing that they want, that you want, then that's it. It's done.
Is there a joke that, maybe I won't say best, but is there a joke that you've written that you call one of your favorites of all time?
Oh, I don't know. I don't have a favorite. I mean, I have a lot of them, and it's always when I'm put on the spot. You know, the awful thing is, if you say, what's your favorite joke, and then you do a joke, and then they say, that's not funny, you know. I mean, so, but it's my favorite. So I never single anything out. I mean, the most famous one, I suppose, is the Sophie Tucker joke for Bet. You know, get off my back, and that kind of took on a life of its own. But I have a lot of jokes that I'm peculiarly fond of. And some of them, like the jokes for Billy on the Oscars, were very much of their moment. They have a shelf life because they're about incidents that happened then that don't have the same kind of resonance that they do now. But so I could never, you know, find a favorite other than, I guess, Get Off My Back because it's so perfect.
We've spoken about fan mail and fan letters and the sort of things that people write. Do you hear from aspiring writers who say, I don't know what to do now, and how do I become that funny?
I say it to myself every day, and then I pull a hair from my nose and cry. That's how I become a great Shakespearean actor. I hear nobody knows what to do next. Everybody's always running around saying, what do I do now? I think you're either funny or you're not funny. You either have a worldview that you utilize that makes you an amusing person. We all know people who say, I'm doing a comedy, and you say, but you're not funny. And sometimes that works in their favor. I mean, their deadpan is what makes them funny. But I think that funny people present themselves, and you go, that guy's clever, or he's a funny performer, funny on the face of it. Some people are not. Their material is funny, but they're not particularly funny. And if they're asking you, how do I get funny, then forget it. Go into heavy labor.
So someone
do something else. Go be a hedge fund trader.
Someone tells you, I think I have it. In fact, I know I have it. What advice do you give them?
Let me see it. If you have it, let me see it. People who say that, that's fine. Good. High marks for your self-confidence. Now, what have you got to show me? Yeah, it's all. I mean, a lot of people have tremendous ambition, and what's scary is how far they get on ambition alone. But at a certain point, they have to deliver the goods, and they either can or they can't.
Do you recommend things like the writers' programs at the studios and those avenues that are specifically sitcom and drama writers' paths, or your path, perhaps, where it really was personality and connection driven?
Well, I was writing for specific people, and that led to a lot of other things. When people want to learn how to write movies or learn how to write television, and they take courses, that will teach you the formulas. You'll be able to imitate those things, and it'll show you how things are structured. But you actually have to apply genuine humor, genuine wit, or genuine funniness in the comedy world to make any of that stuff fly. My quibble with all of those things is they tend to create people who are writing in a mold and aren't thinking of anything unusual. They are writing in a certain kind of rhythm. And you see a lot of it on television. You see a lot of, you watch a show and you'll know immediately it's one of those shows where everybody has been schooled to set up the punch and this and that, and it doesn't work unless it's done by people who are really, really funny. I mean, 2.5 Men is a great example. I mean, a show written by people who are really, really funny, and they make all of that stuff work. Most of those shows in that formula don't work at all. That's one of the reasons that there's so much stuff now that's being shot like movies. Funny things like Entourage and Modern Family and things like that are not being shot conventionally because they break the rhythm that people have been taught to write in. Because that's unfortunately the way it goes. A whole generation of writers grew up watching Friends, and so they write everything like it's an episode of Friends. And unless you're really clever, that doesn't really work.
Have you considered mentoring someone?
Well, no. No, I mean, I get requests to do that, but I'm busy doing what I do, and I wind up mentoring my friends. And if somebody I know has a question, needs a little help, I'm always there for it. But I'm not taking anybody on like, Big Brother.
And on that note, we have to say thank you.
Thank you. I'll mentor you.